Some Australian cars aged like milk, but others somehow got better with every decade. What started as normal family sedans, forgotten coupes, and old driveway heroes became design icons people stop and stare at. Even today, these are the 15 Australian cars that aged beautifully, and number 1 is so perfectly shaped it'll probably still look timeless 100 years from now. The FX is not what anyone would call flashy. There's no aggressive styling, no dramatic lines, just a rounded, friendly shape with simple chrome trim that looks exactly like what it is. A car from the late 1940s trying to be honest and practical, and yet that complete lack of pretension is precisely why it has become so charming with age. While flashier cars from the same era now look try-hard and dated, the FX has settled into a kind of quiet, timeless dignity. It looks like a cartoon car in the best possible way, all soft curves and gentle proportions. The FX didn't get more beautiful because it changed. It got more beautiful because everything around it did, and it simply stayed exactly, wonderfully itself. Most early Falcons have a slightly awkward, transitional look to them, like a car still figuring out its own identity. The XP hardtop skipped that whole phase entirely. The pillarless hardtop body removed the bulky door frames and gave the whole car a cleaner, lower, more confident silhouette than anything else wearing a Falcon badge at the time. It captured that classic mid-1960s coupe formula perfectly, sleek without tipping over into excessive, restrained without being boring. Decades later, while other early Falcons look a little fussy and unresolved, the Futura hardtop still looks like it knows exactly what it's doing. It is proof that sometimes the smartest design decision is simply removing things, and Ford figured that out remarkably early. And we're still only warming up. Because next comes the Holden so familiar it basically became the face of suburban Australia, and after that, a family sedan from the 70s that somehow still looks cleaner than cars built decades later. If you asked someone to draw the platonic ideal of a classic Australian family car from memory, there's a very good chance they'd accidentally draw an EH. It has that perfect, almost cartoonish friendliness to its face, simple and neat panel work and proportions that just feel correct in a way that's hard to articulate, but impossible to miss. The chrome trim is generous enough to feel special, without crossing into gaudy showroom excess, which is a balance plenty of cars from this era completely missed. The EH didn't need bold styling gimmicks to age well. It just nailed the fundamentals so thoroughly that 6 decades later it still reads as instantly, warmly familiar. Simplicity done exactly right tends to last forever. The HQ Kingswood had an unenviable job. It needed to look modern in 1971 without looking ridiculous in the decades that followed, and somehow it absolutely nailed that balancing act. The body is wide, smooth, and confidently simple, with none of the fussy creases and awkward angles that doomed plenty of its boxier successors to looking dated almost immediately. Compared to some of the sharper-edged sedans that came later in the decade, the HQ still reads as clean and remarkably contemporary, which is a wild thing to say about a car built over 50 years ago. It is the ultimate everyday Aussie classic, the kind of shape so well resolved that it never really needed updating. Some designs simply get it right the first time. A 50-year-old Kingswood still looking fresh is impressive, but now we get tougher. Coming up next is the blunt Falcon that turned square styling into attitude, and then the tiny Torana that made bigger cars look lazy. The XY Falcon was never trying to be elegant, and that is exactly why it has aged so well. It went all in on a square, muscular stance with a strong, simple front end, prioritizing attitude over delicacy at every single design decision. While more refined cars from the era can look fussy or overworked today, the XY just looks tough, and tough never really goes out of style. There's an honesty to its proportions that modern retrospective eyes appreciate enormously, a sense that nothing on this car was added purely for decoration. It is not pretty in the conventional sense, and it never claimed to be. The XY Falcon aged into the perfect blunt, no-nonsense Australian sedan, and frankly the world needs more cars with that kind of confidence. Small cars often get overlooked in best-looking conversations because they lack the sheer physical presence of a big coupe, and that is a genuine injustice in the case of the LJ Torana. It is compact, sure, but every line on it suggests barely contained aggression, like the car is permanently leaning forward, ready to bolt off the line the second you blink. It has that unmistakable little Bathurst weapon look, purposeful and tightly wound rather than delicate or pretty. Decades on, it still manages to look genuinely exciting, parked next to cars 3 times its size, which is a remarkable trick for something this small. The LJ proves that aging beautifully has nothing to do with bulk and everything to do with character. The Torana proved a small car could still look dangerous, but the next two are completely different beasts. First, a Chrysler coupe that looked like it came from its own planet, and then an 80s Commodore that escaped the beige box curse completely. Here's the thing about the Charger that makes it special. Even within this list of already special cars, it never looked like it was trying to be a Holden or trying to be a Falcon. The short wheelbase, the fastback roofline, the wide, aggressive stance, all of it adds up to something that feels distinctly, unmistakably its own creation rather than a response to what the other two were doing. That originality is exactly why it has aged so gracefully. Trends come and go, but a genuinely original shape tends to dodge the worst of them entirely because it was never chasing a passing fashion in the first place. The Charger looked like nothing else in 1971, and remarkably, it still looks like nothing else today. That kind of confidence rarely fades. The 1980s were not kind to automotive design in general, a decade full of slab sides and forgettable boxes on wheels, which makes the VL Commodore's survival genuinely impressive. The slim, sharp front end and smooth, uncluttered sides give it a crispness that most of its boxy contemporaries simply never had, even when they were brand new in the showroom. While a lot of 80s Australian sedans now look like rolling beige apologies, the VL has aged into something that actually reads as stylish, almost ahead of its time. It is proof that good proportions can outlast a difficult design decade entirely unscathed. Out of all the Commodores from this era, the VL is the one that still earns a genuine second look. The VL made the 80s look cool, but now we're jumping back to proper old-school class. Next is the long Fairlane that looked like Aussie executive money, followed by the Holden with fins so dramatic it could never be mistaken for boring. There is a very specific kind of confidence that comes from a long, low body and just the right amount of chrome, and the ZD Fairlane absolutely understood the assignment. It carries itself with that classic Australian executive presence, substantial without tipping into bloated, polished, without ever looking flashy or desperate for attention. It manages the rare trick of feeling genuinely special while still looking entirely sensible, like the kind of car a respected local doctor would drive without anyone batting an eyelid. Decades later, that restrained luxury formula reads as remarkably tasteful compared to some of the louder design choices that followed it. The ZD Fairlane is old-school Australian executive style, executed with real precision, and it still wears the part beautifully. The FB committed fully to the late 1950s American fin craze, and somehow that commitment is exactly what makes it so endearing today. The chrome detailing, the sweeping curves, the cheerful two-tone paint schemes, and those wonderfully theatrical rear fins all add up to a car that takes itself just seriously enough, and not 1 ounce more. What could have aged as embarrassingly over the top instead aged into pure, unfiltered charm. There's a playful confidence to the FB that more conservative sedans of the same era simply don't have, and that personality has only grown more endearing as the decades passed. It went from being a fairly ordinary family car in period straight into being a beloved character piece, fins and all. Those fins were pure charm, but the next car is much sleeker. Coming up is a pillarless Valiant that looked genuinely expensive, and then a hand-built Aussie sports car that had no business looking this exotic. There is something about a pillarless coupe body that instantly elevates a car's presence, and the VF Valiant hardtop wears that trick beautifully. It is wide, smooth, and carries itself with an understated expensive quality that never feels like it's trying too hard to impress anyone, which somehow makes it more impressive in the long run. It also brings genuine variety to conversations like this one, refusing to let the entire story be told by Holdens and Falcons alone. The proportions are elegant rather than aggressive, more sophisticated cocktail party than backyard burnout, and that restraint has aged remarkably well. The VF hardtop proves Chrysler Australia could do quiet elegance just as convincingly as they could do outright muscle. The Nagari still looks like it drove straight out of a European exotic car brochure, which is an extraordinary thing to say about a low-volume, hand-built Australian sports car from a small operation that most people have never heard of. The low body, sharp nose, and clean sports car silhouette give it genuine exotic presence, decades before Australian exotic was even a phrase anyone used. It doesn't look anything like a typical family sedan because it was never trying to be one. Every line suggests Australia briefly decided to compete directly with Europe's best, and against all reasonable odds, actually pulled it off. The Nagari aged into something genuinely special, a reminder that this country occasionally built things that had absolutely no business looking this good. And now we're into the final three, where the list gets seriously hard to argue with. Coming up are two legendary Australian coupes with massive presence, and then the Holden that might be the cleanest, most timeless shape this country ever produced. The HQ Monaro coupe lives somewhat in the shadow of its more famous HK predecessor, and that is honestly a shame because the more time you spend looking at it, the more it reveals. It is a more mature, more stretched out shape, less about instant shock value and more about a slow building, confident presence that rewards a second and third look. The long bonnet and substantial rear quarters give it genuine road presence without resorting to anything flashy or desperate. It is the sort of car that doesn't announce itself immediately but absolutely earns your attention once it has it. Decades on, the HQ Monaro coupe has quietly aged into one of the most underrated shapes Holden ever produced. If you ever needed proof that some cars are simply built to be photographed, the XA Falcon hardtop is Exhibit 1. The massive rear quarter panels, the pillarless side glass, and that dramatically sweeping coupe roofline combine into a shape with so much drama, it genuinely looks like it was designed for a poster before it was ever designed for a road. It carries that proper Australian attitude in every panel, bold without being clumsy, aggressive without losing any elegance along the way. Decades later, it remains one of the most striking Falcon shapes ever created, the kind of car that still stops people mid-sentence at a car show. The XA hardtop didn't just age well, it aged into an absolute icon. At number 1, there was really only ever going to be one choice. The HK Monaro looks stunning from literally every single angle, which is a remarkably rare achievement for any car from any era. The pillarless coupe shape, the smooth unbroken roofline, and that classic confident front end all combine into something that simply refuses to look old, no matter how many decades pass. It is clean, muscular, and unmistakably Australian in every single detail, the kind of design that doesn't need context or nostalgia to be appreciated. Out of every car on this entire list, the HK Monaro is the one that feels genuinely timeless, as relevant and beautiful today as the moment it first rolled off the line. Some cars simply got it perfect on the first try. And that's the 15 Australian cars that aged beautifully, from humble old sedans to coupes that still look stunning today. But which one do you think aged the best? Let me know in the comments, click like if you enjoyed the video, and subscribe for more episodes. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.